Southwest Washington is blessed with some of the most productive forests on the face of the earth. For thousands of years, this land of wood and water, cedar and salmon supported a rich Native American cultural tradition, whose wealth was derived from the region's abundant natural resources. Northwest Coast Indians, such as the Chinook Indians of the Lower Columbia, harvested western red cedar to make many of the material goods central to their culture, from magnificent canoes to their winter lodges. When white settlers began pouring into the region in the middle part of the 19th century, they found they first had to clear land of immense stands of timber to build their homes and farms. Over time, individuals who logged by choice rather than necessity saw in the virgin forests of Southwest Washington a land of opportunity. Edwin Loomis and partner Charles Stewart built the first sawmill in present-day Pacific County, Washington, on Baker Bay at Pacific City in the fall of 1850. That short-lived venture soon ended when Pacific City became part of Fort Canby Military Reservation, but others were to follow. By 1870, B.J. Knapp began operations at Knapton, a major sawmill center until the 1940s. Within a few years, there were mills and timber camps throughout the entire region. Logging in the early days was hard work. It was all hand logging and muscle power at first. Teams of oxen or horses provided the power to haul the logs down skid roads and out of the woods. By 1890, local logging outfits had converted to steam donkeys, snaking in logs over the ground on lengths of steel cable. In this region of abundant water, the tidewater areas were the first to be logged. Most logs made their way to the river, where they were boomed into rafts and floated to the mill. In the 1890s, an overland transportation link was provided by the Iwako Railroad and Navigation Company's narrow-gauge railroad, which hauled logs from the Long Beach Peninsula and Willapa Bay to be milled in Iwako. Later, logging railroads with geared locomotives made it possible for timber operations to push deep into the heavily forested Willapa Hills. There, high climbers topped spar trees, and high lead logging tackled the big woods. Les Peterson, a longtime resident of Pacific County, grew up near Deep River, Washington, in the 1920s.
I'm Les Peterson, and I live in Iwako at the present time. I was raised in a large logging camp.
Les's father worked on the logging railroad. After high school, he, too, went to work in the woods.
I got a job working with the civil engineer that was laying out railroad grade, and from there on, I graduated in, you might call it graduating into other jobs.
Les had grown up in what was called a family camp for the families of married men, where he attended a one-room schoolhouse. Living in a bunkhouse in the bachelor's camp was an entirely different kind of educational experience.
They had quite a number of people they called tramp loggers. These were single men that spent probably most of their entire life in the logging industry and in logging camps. Some of them didn't have much. Just what they carried, and they'd have a suitcase and a pack sack and a pair of cork shoes.
These tramp loggers often stayed in camp for months at a time. When they made a trip to town, it usually meant going on a spree in Portland's red light district.
And a lot of them would get in there and they hadn't had anything to drink for a while, and sometimes the alcohol would take over their better judgment, and after a few days, they'd wind up in a hotel. They didn't remember where they'd been, and most of their money was gone. And these fellows, why, a lot of them, the loggers, they got different nicknames. That they were characters. It was a time when it was highball logging. Everybody worked hard, and they tried to get as many logs out as you could. If you didn't, why, there was always, they could always send to the employment office important to get somebody that would.
Timber falling in those days was all done by hand with axes and crosscut saws.
And they had what they call a springboard, and it was about probably 6-7 feet long and had iron on one end, and they would chop little notches in the side of the tree. They'd put this springboard in, and then they would stand on it, and they were up a ways, and they would chop these undercuts. Then they'd get on the other side, and they'd have the springboard. Each one would be on a springboard, and they had what they call a falling saw.
Cy Robinson of Iwako recalls that some of these saws reached enormous size.
In the old days, they had them falling saws, and I seen one 15 feet long. My granddad had a falling saw that was 15 feet long.
And this springboard, of course, it would work like a diving board a little bit, and they would get a rhythm going with it, work it in with this saw, and it was surprising the amount of trees that they could fall in one day. Operation in those days was steam. They had steam locomotives and steam donkeys. But in the 30s, why then, they developed a diesel engine, and the equipment started to change, and the log truck. They, where they used to build roads with steam shovels, why, they developed the bulldozer. And then the log truck, it didn't require the expensive railroads, so that was a period of big change in the logging.
Local timber operations were using chainsaws by the time Cy Robinson went to work at Nacelle in 1948.
And of course that made it a lot easier. You know, they had some pretty good sized chainsaws that fell in big trees, you know. And they didn't have to use an axe to cut undercuts anymore. They just sawed them with a chainsaw. The same way with the backside.
Logger poet Woody Gifford worked for Weyerhaeuser in the Grays River area on a logging show just over the hill from where Cy Robinson was working for Jim Lindros.
He was the rigging slinger there, and Cy had the prettiest voice I think I ever heard, at least of the guys that were hauling.
Like the rigging slinger will holler, slack a haul back or something, and you put the signals in, and then go ahead when the chokers are set, and you do all the signaling. But he'll holler at you and tell you what he wants.
Cy was a crackerjack. His voice was just beautiful.
Woody Gifford mainly worked in the cutting crew as a bucker, limbing and sawing timber into marketable lengths.
There's something about bucking is kind of fascinating. You look a log over and you look at to see what's going to happen when you drop a log, what's going to change ends, or you've got to watch out to where you are. If you're below it, you've got to watch out that it isn't going to roll on you, but you seldom ever get below a log. You're always above and then bucking, but there's things that can happen too. So it's a pretty ticklish work.
The bucker's job can be very challenging. Woody remembers the aftermath of the Columbus Day storm of 1962.
And if you get into what they call a bear trap, after the Columbus Day storm, there was a lot of those around. All the trees fell down in a crisscross, and then you had to get into there and cut them so they can take out the logs. And you had to get in the bottom and cut the bottom logs first, and you had to be careful that you didn't cut the wrong one, because you could have the whole works on you. So there was a lot of thinking connected with it, and it was a challenge. It was a challenge. If you could, so you could outwit the trees themselves.
Logging has changed a great deal since the early days. The old growth is now gone, replaced by managed tree farms. Men work with machinery instead of hand tools. But one thing about loggers hasn't changed much.
You couldn't run a logger out of the woods with a two-bit axe. You don't want to do anything but work in the woods.
What's your fondest memory of working in the woods? As you look back.
Quitting. I never missed the woods. You know, it's not as hard as it used to be. It's not as hard to work as it used to be. There's so much more machinery.
What's your fondest memory looking back on your days in the woods?
Well, what would you call it? Camaraderie, the relationship with the other workers. They're a great bunch of guys.
Well, let's put it this way. It keeps you in prime condition. It does. Run up and down them hills all day long. Comes handy during deer season.
Oh, to be back in the logging woods, to relive my working years, to be with the crew when the morning dew sparkles as the daylight clears, to feel the brush of the low-hung boughs, the good earth beneath my feet, and hear the faller's warning cry as he scurries to his safe retreat. Just to hear the donkey whistles echo from the yarding side, hear the sudden burst of the diesel bank when the puncher cracks the throttle wide, then the steady roar as she picks the slack and the big log begins to slide. To see the sturdy Kenworths wrapped up and wooded down, hear them drop through their gears until the flat ground appears, then level off and head for town. Just to catch the crummy once again before the break of dawn, reach the logging show, watch the warming fire glow before the darkness is gone. Oh, the pleasant thoughts that memory brings never fail to renew the thrill of those blissful days with the logging crew. Somehow they haunt me and always will.